So we're going to look at Alfred Lord Tennyson today, and with Tennyson move into the Victorian period, which actually we were in the Victorian period last time, but I pulled Robert Louis Stevenson forward a little bit because I wanted to emphasize the continuity in themes that arose from, among other things, the way in which the Enlightenment's view of science became problematic for its successors. And I could have just as easily chosen Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as well, because it's a similar text in certain respects. It's a novel, a brief novel, and it's dealing with monstrosity in conjunction with modern science. In the case of Mary Shelley, Dr. Frankenstein operates on the dead bodies that he's exhumed from graves and patches them together and builds this 8-foot-high creature, which is not the way you see the creature of Frankenstein in the movies. He is highly intelligent. He's sort of like an atom. And there's a lot of references to Paradise Lost, in fact, in that text. The monster reads Paradise Lost and sees it as a sort of an analogy to his own situation. He has a creator. He's like Adam, but whereas in Paradise Lost, God the Father loved his creature, Frankenstein, having created him, hates him and wants nothing to do with him. So there's a lot of reflection there, comparison. And then last time when we looked at Robert Louis Stevenson, we saw rather than operating on somebody else, he operated on himself. And he used the means of science on his own body as an experiment. It's interesting. But he did it for a reason that you wouldn't have expected. He didn't do it to improve himself. He did it to allow himself, the Victorian gentleman, to let his dark side, to let his hair down, if you will, to let his sinful desires creep out a little bit, which as a Victorian he didn't feel like he could do. So the doctor had on the front of his practice, was very civil and would operate like a gentleman. He was well respected, etc. The back door entrance is where Mr. Hyde entered, and of course did all sorts of things that Dr. Jekyll probably wanted to do but didn't feel he was able to do. And so science, the part of science which is not necessarily connected with the purest motives, is revealed by Stevenson. The scientist isn't necessarily motivated by good things. He's motivated by power and power over nature. But is the power over nature which he is trying to involve himself in for the benefit of humanity, or is it for the selfish benefit of the scientist? In this case, he's not putting it on somebody else, he's doing it towards himself. But all sorts of issues get brought up in the process of human nature. So Stevenson's suggestion, implicit in this, is that our nature isn't fundamentally good. And the veneer of civilization, which Dr. Jekyll clearly adheres to, is just that. It's a veneer. Underneath that veneer, there's something that Christians will call sin. And I think Stevenson exhibits that very well. And eventually the science goes out of control, and he's no longer able to control when Mr. Hyde comes out, and in fact Mr. Hyde completely takes over him, in the same sense that a Christian would say that indulging in sin repeatedly is like addiction. At first it's sort of like a drug. It's a rush, or it seems a very positive experience, and then afterwards you're always chasing that high. And eventually you find that rather than controlling your own body, it's controlling you. You're a slave to your addictions and your sins, to the point where you can't free yourself. And that, I think Stevenson depicts that rather well. But he does it in connection with science. And so I think that's very interesting on the course, is to see Enlightenment science. Remember, Swift's Modest Proposal was talking about using science to manage a better society. How that power over nature might not be always used for to the best ends. does seem to me that it has contemporary relevance as well. Probably wasn't lost on you. COVID lockdowns and all the various scientific protocols that were done in the name of science without addressing the question of whether it was good or right or just or as objective and disinterested as it appeared to be. Maybe there were more selfish motivations involved in the science. So it's just very interesting. Tennyson